Four of a kind. The odds of pulling a pair of aces in the deal were low. Jack House almost went all in on the first round of betting. But there was a smug little son of a bitch in a western shirt and Elvis sunglasses who won the last three hands, and Jack wanted to take him for some of his money. So he tossed in a chip, just to buy in to see the turn. "I'm in," he licked his lips. He really needed this money. Lot rent was due 3 days ago, and Ms. Katsopoulos was hounding the step of his RV to collect. He had vowed last time to never be late again after his landlady made arrangements to extend him credit. Jack wasn't sure if he could fuck a senior citizen again. It would be one thing if the former showgirl retained the toned fitness of her ancient glory, but decades of smoking and thin mints had not been kind. He shivered at the memory of sagging skin and flabby wattles as Western Shirt put his chip in. "Tell," the smug man grinned under his shades. It was unprofessional and unnecessary as every player had seen it. The other four players wasted no time in debate before joining the pot. Jack almost shivered again. Thoughts of his amorous landlady disappeared when the dealer flipped the turn to reveal a third ace. He wanted to shout, "All in." He wanted to scream, "Eat it, motherfucker." But he counted the stack of chips in front of him with one hand. It didn't take long. He put two of them to slow play and hunched back in his seat. The other players studied him. A lot of pros said don't play the cards, play the player, but Jack didn't think that made too much sense. Players lied. All of the time. Professionally. Personally, he believed in Lady Luck. Sometimes she shined on him. Like this hand just in time for rent, a couple of bills, and that red-headed cocktail waitress that kept catching his eye with a smile that said she wasn't really that shy. Sometimes Lady Luck hated him, which is how he ended up an aspiring professional gambler and unemployed anything else living in a second-hand RV. Western Shirt shifted forward and funneled his chips into the pot. "All in," he stared at Jack. "You're bluffing." The next player folded, but the other two jumped in and it went to Jack to call. He pushed his tiny stack of chips into the pot. The dealer turned a second ace on the river card. "Pair showing," she said. "Turn over your cards." Jack flipped over his pair of aces. "Son of a bitch," Western Shirt muttered as the other two players made sounds of disgust. Jack raked in the pot and tried not to giggle. He had hoped for rent money. He had prayed to the gambling gods for just a little more for food and a few debts. As he stacked the $52,300 and some odd dollars in chips on a tray to turn in, the cocktail waitress sauntered past. "Lucky duck," she shot him a grin. He held out a $100 chip. "About time I had some." "Thanks," she pocketed the chip and eyed the tray. "I'm off in an hour. Want to get a drink?" Her green eyes twinkled in the neon glow of the casino lights. "I'd like that." Jack pointed to a high top in the bar across the floor. She winked and let him watch her walk away. "Two." "Before you ask," she said as she slid onto the stool next to him and almost made him spill his drink. "My name is Kansas and no, I'm from Colorado." Her green eyes twinkled while her knee brushed against his thigh. "We named the dog Indiana," Jack said in a very poor Scottish accent. "You have chosen poorly," she winked. Jack laughed with her. He felt amazing. He had money in his pocket, a cold shock top lemon shandy on the table and a beautiful woman to banter with. Lady Luck was loving him indeed. Kansas waved over the waiter. "I'd like a real beer," she lifted Jack's bottle. "And the lady is buying." "Real men drink whatever they want," he defended. "My sorority sister will enjoy her wine cooler while you go pull me a Guinness." She sent the waiter on his way. "Give me your particulars while we wait," she said. Jack took a pull on the long neck. He should have ordered another with her, but he could wait for her to catch up with round two. "What you see is what you get," he said. "I make my money the old-fashioned way." "Hooking?" Her smile sparkled as the waiter delivered her beer. "Cut rate prices," he told her. "It's the buy one, get one free business model. I'd pay for that ride." He paused with the bottle halfway to his lips and couldn't fight the grin that split his face. "I could put you on the frequent flyer plan," he offered. It was her turn to grin as her knee continued the slow rub up and down his leg. "My turn." Kansas took a sip and wiped her mouth with the tip of a manicured finger. "I work here and at a club you don't know, but I'm really a businesswoman." "What club?" he asked. "I know lots of places." She ducked her head and blushed. "Cat's meow." "I know it," he said. "Waitress, huh?" He slid his eyes from her toes to her ample cleavage, straining at the confines of her blouse, being too obvious to be serious. I don't strip, she whispered. Not in public. Tell me more about your businesswoman stuff, he said. And maybe I'll take you someplace private. Do you think anyone ever said I want to be a waitress when I grow up? Jack shook his head. He didn't think many kids had that in their dream house, unless mom or dad was a waiter. They don't. But we start doing it because it's easy and the money is good. He studied her full lips as she settled them against the frost-tinged glass. I can be, he agreed, matching her with a sip of his own although the bottle was almost empty. If you look like this, the money can stay good. But not forever. Hence the businesswoman? Exactly. What kind of business? The easy kind. Jack waved at the waiter and held up 2 fingers for another round. I like easy, he said. I could tell. She tilted her head left in a way that was both inviting and a tease. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair from her cheek and tucked it behind her ear. She leaned her cheek against his palm and locked him in her gaze. The waiter clinked down a bottle and a glass, interrupting the moment. She shuddered. You feel that, right? Yes, he forced out a croak. It's almost chemical. One hand moved to his knee while the other grabbed the dark Guinness and drank it. Electric, he agreed. I haven't felt that in a long time. Do you have someplace we can go? Her fingers moved up his leg and squeezed. Jack almost sputtered his beer. It's not much, he said. Is it private? She leaned in close and whispered in his ear. Her hand moved all the way to rest against the growing tightness in his jeans. Mostly. Mine isn't, she said softly. Finish your beer and let's get out of here. 3. They barely made it through the door. Nice place, Kansas huffed in a husky voice as she glanced around the Spartan interior and worked the buttons of her blouse. Jack slipped his shirt over his head and kissed her down the 3-foot passage to the bed space. She grabbed his face and kissed him as she undid his pants. He let them fall off his narrow hips and slide down his muscular thighs. Commando? She grinned in admiration. Only way to roll. She shimmied out of her skirt and let him appreciate her for a moment. Me too, she purred and pushed him back on his bed. She took him in her hand and slid him up inside her as she straddled his waist. Oh God, he groaned at how warm and slick she was. Not yet, she giggled and slapped him across the face. He held a hand to the growing red spot on his cheek. Distraction, she explained and ground against him. It worked, he said. Jack ran one hand over her chest while the other caressed her legs and buttock. She rocked back and forth in tiny little circles, squeezing and grinding down on him. Her breath got shallow, her face creased in concentration. She moved faster and faster, circles harder until... Now, she gasped. You're gonna make me come. She did and he did in a groaning heap of sweating pleasure. Kansas slid off him and rested against his chest. That was nice, she breathed against his skin. Just nice, he turned to face her. Give me 10 minutes and I'll go for great. He kissed her deep and 9 minutes later he did. 4. He woke up next to an angel. That's how he felt. Kansas sprawled beside him in all her naked splendor. He spent a few moments admiring the curve of her buttocks, the shape of her thigh and the way her red hair framed porcelain features. He reached over and started rubbing her back. She stirred and shifted her legs wider. Lower, she murmured without opening her eyes. He did as she asked, moving the tip of his fingers in wider patterns until he eased a hand between her legs and stroked while she moaned. She rolled over and pulled him on top of her, gasping as he slid inside of her. It was their 4th or 5th time and just as good as the first. When they finished, half on and half off the bed, she giggled and grabbed his face with both hands. I'm glad I met you, she kissed him. A sentiment I share, he assured her. I have to go to a meeting, she said. Or I would ask you to stay. That's very nice of you, he smacked her lightly on the bottom and kissed the boo-boo better. Considering it's my place. Don't you want to know about my meeting? I assumed you would tell me if it was my business. It's about business, she rolled over and traced a pattern on his chest. The businesswoman kind of business we almost discussed last night? Exactly. I'm going to meet an investor and tell him he's out. Why is he out? Asked Jack. 'Cause you're in. I'm in? Like you were deep in me, she growled and scratched his chest leaving little red claw marks. I want to be in business with you. What if I'm not expanding my portfolio? She reached down to his crotch and held him limp in her hand. He twitched as her powers of massage nursed him back to life. Honey, I can expand more than your portfolio. He reached for her again, but she rolled away. He put his arms behind his head and watched her root around for cast-off clothes and get dressed. Meet me later? When and where? Noon, she said. Behind the win. He nodded as she bent over and kissed him. They drew it out for a few moments until the random wanderings of his hands became a little too focused. She pulled away with a sigh. Maybe later, she promised. After. He fell back onto the bed and listened to her leave. 5. Jack laid back in the crumpled mess of sheets that smelled of perfume, sweat and sex. A grin stretched the corners of his mouth into an almost painful rictus. The pillow held traces of her hair, and the thought of her smooth skin against his lips had him ready for noon. Hopefully they could come back to his place for an afternoon of delight. A metal clank interrupted his fantasy of the memories he planned to make. He jumped out of bed and slid into some running shorts as he hopped on one foot, then the other across the 19 feet that made up his home. He shoved the door open, ready to fight. Miss Katsopoulos was down on all fours by the front tire. She finished clamping a yellow metal bot on the hub and brushed off her knees as she creaked back to her feet. Enjoy your guest? She giggled. Jack couldn't tell if she was jealous. I'm too old to be jealous, she set off his look. The former showgirl could have had a mind reader's act off the strip. Her accent alone would sell the act, even blunted as it was by a lifetime spent in the Vegas desert. Ms. K. Jack began. She held up a hand to stop him. You're late. It's simple math, you beautiful boy. Ms. K eyed the outline of muscles etched in his stomach. I need the rent, some rent, or you've got to go. Jack stepped out onto the pea gravel patio in his bare feet and leaned against the edge of the door. He yelped at the heat and flinched away. Even in the morning, once the sun topped the hills in the east, it baked everything in its relentless march above the valley. Ms. K, I've got it, he said. She held out her hand, palm up. The other hand gripped the lapel of a silk kimono and barely kept it closed. Fluffy house slippers completed her ensemble and little else. It was all she ever wore. I don't have it with me, Jack lied. I'm going to get it. She crossed her arms over her pendulant breasts and frowned. Did your pretty friend bring you an inheritance? No such luck, Miss K. No luck for you, cackled the wizened crone. But for me, I will get very lucky to help you. Jack held back a shiver as he leaned against the aluminum frame of his RV. I really appreciate you working with me, Miss K, but things like that aren't working on me right now. He waved a hand as if to present his exhausted and used crotch. She wiggled a finger to dismiss him. Now perhaps. After what I heard last night, I am not surprised. But you are young, so you will recover quickly, I think. Jack knew there was no arguing and bowed his head in defeat. Money or the money shot, that's all she wanted. Okay. Tonight? Yes. And take shower, she called over her shoulder as she swayed away. Before I cut off water and electric. 6. Jack stood in the parking lot behind the When the World Rose colored through the polarized lenses of his sunglasses. Lady Luck was loving him indeed. He was still tired and a little sore from the long night of hot sex, but nothing a few hours and a few beers couldn't cure. He planned to listen to Kansas' sales pitch, ravage her repeatedly until they both couldn't walk straight, and then ask her to dinner. Maybe over a proper date he would consider her proposal. It was probably a timeshare scam or maybe a direct marketing thing, but who knew, maybe it was something legit. Flipping a house or funding a porno. It couldn't hurt to listen. A jacked-up 4-door pickup truck on oversized wheels took a corner too fast as it squealed into the lot. Hip-hop bass thumped through the concrete canyon so loud the words, melody and music couldn't be distinguished. It was just rhythmic noise. The truck rumbled in front of him and Kansas leaned out of the passenger window. Get in, she popped open the back door. Jack hoisted himself into an interior that reeked of weed. Not even the good stuff, but the skunky smell from cheap MJ kept wet in hefty bags too long. The driver glared over the seat at him, but didn't turn the bass down. He was short with pale skin and soft looking, like a dough boy who spent too much time on a couch playing video games. He was dressed like a wannabe gangsta, hat turned sideways, oversized jersey and what looked like skirts with high tops. His glare faded to a frown to show off 2 gold-capped teeth. This is Goldie, Kansas explained over the music. That's original, said Jack. What? She pointed to her ear. Nothing, he waved her off. We're going to go buy a classic Corvette, she screamed. Think they'll hear us coming? What? He waved her off again. We're going to flip it. Jack wondered about the driver as he took off from the parking lot and drove west toward Red Rock Canyon. He pouted a little. The music was too loud, if you could even call it music, since all he could make out was the thump. And who was this driver? Was he the investor? Was he a partner in the deal? Something more? It was hard to think with the pounding bass so near the back of his head and the stink of the skunk weed clogging his nose. Kansas slipped her hand around the side of the seat and touched his knee. It was an awkward angle and a little too secretive, but it made visions of possibilities pop in his mind. Those visions lasted until they reached a secluded park on the outskirts of town. The truck pulled into the park and Goldie finally reached up to turn the music down. The silence echoed as they creaked to a stop behind a pavilion. Here we are, said Kansas. She hopped out of the truck. Jack hopped out behind her and followed. They were a couple of miles from the buildings that made up the famous strip, the skyscrapers and resorts a smudge on the horizon. Cars passed along the road but far enough away to afford privacy. Jack thought if it were just him in Kansas, he could indulge in a little outdoor fantasy. He almost put his hands out to grab her. Hey, Goldie said behind him. Stick your hands in the air. Jack lifted both hands up. Wave them? Like I just don't care? Do you think this is funny? I've got a gun, motherfucker. I do not, said Jack. I think it's not fair. I mean, come on, I was expecting a Corvette. I've got the vet, said Goldie. Give me your roll. And the girl, Jack sighed as he pulled the bank roll out of his pocket. At least I got laid. You fucked him? She sucked her breath in but fought down the panic. Honey, she purred. You said to get him here any way I could. Besides, you're bigger than him. Hey, grumbled Jack, fingers still pointing to the lone cloud above. I am, Goldie grinned, gold tooth flashing in the sun. He slipped a hand around her waist and dragged her in for a tongue-dripping kiss. Jack bolted. He zigged. He zagged. Goldie screamed but he didn't shoot. After a couple of more zigs, Jack ran straight out. He figured Goldie would have taken a shot or two by now and the wannabe gangsta was content with his newfound largesse. But he didn't stop running. 7. Jack trudged up Tropicana Boulevard toward the strip. He could have taken Flamingo from Red Rock Canyon but figured Goldie and Kansas might use that more traveled route to look for him. Tropicana was only several blocks further on and it led exactly where he wanted. The monorail connected with MGM and he could sneak a ride north. That gave him two options. He could hit a couple of spots on the strip and try to make some rent money, or he could keep going to the RV park and spend some time with Ms. K to buy more time to get the rent money. Neither option appealed to him at the moment. He sighed and kicked a pile of dust just to watch it scatter in the wind. Lady Luck must be pretty pissed at him. He'd been down on luck before, really up against the wall with debt collectors of the really violent persuasion, but no one had ever tried to kill him before. He grumbled. Jack could have been holed up in an RV with Kansas right now if things had worked out right. Instead, she played him for his winnings, took everything and left him with nothing, not even his dignity. Well, maybe not nothing. She left him with some fond memories and she really was good in bed. Very enthusiastic. Very vocal. He felt a stirring in his pants and tried to think of something else. He was going to need the freshness of that memory to help with Ms. K if he didn't find a steak before then. Jack needed time to think. The crowds got thicker as he approached the outskirts of the strip. On the main boulevards, a lot of smaller casinos and resorts set up shop to cash in on the cash the strip brought. They looked like the kinds of places that survived on the cast-offs of the mega casinos that turned the Vegas night into a neon starscape. The crowds made him feel safer, at least from the clutches of the wannabe gangsta and the cocktail waitress playing Bonnie to his Clyde. Jack vowed to go back to the bar where she worked and get some answers, then thought with the money she took from him, she would disappear and pop up someplace new when it ran out. It's what he would do. He could spend a lifetime hunting for her, but he really didn't blame her for taking his stake. Sure, he was mad about it, but why hold a grudge? The cards turned for you or against you, and so long as there was enough money when it really mattered, well, he could handle a night with Ms. K for a place to keep his RV and something would turn up to help him get back in a game. The casinos served food and drink, so he wouldn't starve. Kansas was just doing what people who lived in Vegas always did. They survived. Sometimes that survival came on the back of others, much like the casinos that built their fortunes on the losses of so many tourists. They said the house always wins, and Jack knew he had that last name for a reason. As bad as things could get, he had always come out on top. He took the stairs to the monorail 2 at a time just as the train arrived. It was like Lady Luck was telling him he was on his way back into her good graces. 8. Lady Luck may have been a fickle mistress or sometimes like a dominatrix working through rage issues, but every so often, she shined on Jack. He was settled into a corner of the monorail, pout stretched lips under a frown as he watched the loads of tourists climb in and step off. Some bragged of money and wins, many telling tales of winning or winners they knew. They laughed and had fun and drank and ignored his misery. Maybe they thought he was homeless. A crowd of inebriated and boisterous sales convention attendees clambered on and clung to each other as the train took off. Jack watched one of the salesmen grope his coworker, kneading her ass like it was pizza dough directly in front of his face. Jack could have leaned forward and bit her on the butt. He thought about it, and just as soon as he did, the salesman lost his balance. The couple fought against gravity and motion for a moment, and then like drunks the world over they spun around and fell straight into Jack's lap. Laughter ensued as they tried to extract themselves. Jack helped. And while they recounted the adventure with their intoxicated friends, he noticed the salesman's wallet resting against his leg. A thick fat wallet with a couple of pieces of green sticking out, not enough he could tell the denomination, but identifiable as currency. Lots of it. The worn leather rested between his leg and the plastic partition on the seat. Jack just shifted his left over it. It was subtle enough that he could deny it, pass the wallet back if someone called him out on it, but enough to hide it. Then he waited. No one said anything. The lump under his leg put pressure against his skin and he wanted to rip it out and count it. Even if it were singles, the stack was thick enough to be at least 50, maybe 100. He watched the laughing salesman as he continued the groping. It advanced to whispered promises and slobbery tongue kisses, and suddenly they were making excuses to depart from the group. The monorail stopped and disgorged everyone but the salesman, his temporary girlfriend and Jack. They started dry humping as the train took off and almost spilled in his lap again. Jack almost pulled the wallet out when the salesman lifted her skirt and stuck a hand down her black lace panties. It was a good enough show, they deserved a couple of the singles at least. The train stopped in front of the Wynn and the couple moved off, his hand down her panties. Jack held his breath as they passed a metro cop. If the man stopped them, the search for ID might turn them back to the train. But the cop was rousting a drunk beggar who harassed passerbys and ignored one more drunk couple on their way back to a besotted shagging session. The doors closed and the train took off. Jack closed his eyes and sent up a quick prayer to the gambling gods, Lady Luck especially. He fished out the wallet and began counting. 9. Jack stood in front of the flickering neon bleeding off the sign in front of the Cat's Meow. He thought he should probably go someplace else on the off chance that Kansas and the hip-hop clad little man she called a boyfriend showed up. But he knew there was a game here and he had the buy-in smoldering in his pocket. If he did a quick couple of hands of Texas Hold'em and the gambling gods were kind, he could catch up on rent and pocket a little bit for another night. There really wasn't enough time to hunt up another game, so it just made sense, he reasoned. He paid the membership fee at the door and moved through the Christmas light-colored interior. It wasn't too crowded yet, still early for the nightlife to pick up. Got a blueberry wheat? He pressed up to the sweat ring-stained bar. We have beer, the inked-up bartender shouted back over the thrumming echo of pulsating techno. Jack held up one finger and watched the skinny man pull a draft of foamy yellow liquid into a cracked glass. He dripped it on the bar in front of Jack and pointed to the neon blue free beer sign over one shoulder, then to the tip jar with his other hand. Jack stuffed a couple of bills into the pitcher. I heard there's a game here, he said. Ink arms, the beer man gave him the fish eye. Jack wrestled another bill out of his pocket and stuffed it in the jar. He got nothing from the bartender. He repeated the bribe with a 1-up denomination. That seemed to do the trick. It earned another finger point, this time to one of the tree doors on the back wall. Jack gave a weak toast with the weaker beer to say thank you and carried the leaking mug toward the back. It opened to a short hallway that must have been soundproofed because as he shut the door, the techno thump fueling the stripper's gyrations was muted. He took 10 steps to a second door and opened it to a smoke-filled room. 6 men sat around a worn and cigarette-scarred felt-top table. No one glanced up as he stepped in. A little man at the head of the table made a small gesture with his chin. 2 thick giant hands grabbed Jack and frisked him. He was spun around to face the stone visage of a towering bodyguard. The man's hands were rough and efficient as they roamed over Jack and divested him of his bankroll. Two of the men at the table shifted apart to make room. The bodyguard stepped back into the shadows by the doorway. Jack grabbed a chair from the wall and sat at the table with a grin. 10. The velvet padded door opened to admit them into a pink and purple room. The little man from the poker game, Jaeger, led Jack inside, being herded from behind by the towering bodyguard. Jaeger's taste seemed to run along Prince themes, with a solid matte black wall behind the giant desk. Black lights were strategically positioned to give the room an alien feel. Teeth and eyes flashed in an otherworldly glow. "Sit," Jaeger instructed. Jack settled into a long pleather chair and slid back at an angle until his knees were almost as high as his chest. It was designed by a German torture artist, thought Jack. Perfectly selected by Jaeger to put the person in the seat at an awkward angle and lower position. To make matters worse, Jaeger perched on the edge of his desk so the little man towered over Jack. "That was a fortuitous hand, Mr. House," said Jack. "Yes, Jack House." The tiny gangster smoothed his pencil-thin mustache with 2 fingers. "I assume I need no introduction." "Afraid so," shrugged Jack. "You do not know who I am?" Jack shook his head. "Nor my proclivities." "Afraid not." Jaeger smiled. It didn't touch his eyes. "As I said, most fortuitous. For you. I want you to do something for me." Jack pushed further back in the chair. "I don't suck dick, man," he said. "Not my thing." "Do I appear to you like a man who likes another man to suck his dick?" "Appearances can be deceiving." "How correct," Gambler smiled. "And apropos as well. I am not what I appear to be." "Are you a cop?" "Do I look like an officer of the law?" "You do not. And you do not look like a professional gambler, yet time after time word of you spreads on rumor's wings." "So you're a poet?" "Sometimes," Jaeger shrugged. "Sometimes I pimp. Mostly I play poker in the businesses I run. Not enough against men like you." Jack nodded his appreciation. "High praise from a poet pimp poker man," he said. Jaeger nodded to the bodyguard. The giant man opened the door to admit 4 women, a blonde, a dark-skinned brunette, what looked like a teen, and a man in a dress. "Maybe. Do you want a blowjob while we discuss business dealings?" Jack waved him off. "Is that a kid?" The man in the dress growled and took a step toward Jack with a clenched fist. "Annie," Jaeger warned. "I'm 23, asshole," said the teen looker hooker. Annie stepped back, but the tension off her body came in waves. "I do not deal in children," Jaeger explained. "Though there are some who pay extra for the look." Jack grunted. Jaeger sat in the chair behind his desk, followed by the blonde. She kneeled in front of him. Jack heard a quick zip as she casually undid the gangster's pants. He watched the top of her head bob above the desktop and down as Jaeger grimaced in joy. "That last hand made you owe me a great debt. That last hand made you owe me a great debt." Annie shifted her position to stand next to the bodyguard. "I'm going to ask you to satisfy that debt with a favor." He held up a finger on one hand while the other moved to rest on top of the blonde's head. She bobbed faster until he finished, then got up, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "Get a drink," Jaeger instructed. He stood and zipped up. "Let's take a walk," he told Jack. 11. It was a 1972 Cadillac Eldorado convertible, mint green. The straight-up classic was huge, a throwback to when gas was 10 cents a gallon and people didn't give a crap about seat belts. Jack wanted to whistle at the lines. It's the kind of car a flashy guy drives to attract a lot of attention. "Nice ride," he offered. "Like I do not know," Jaeger shot back. He ran the tip of his finger along the fin of the caddy like he would the skin of a lover. "There is an item in the trunk which I would like you to dispose of." Jack smirked. "You got a body in there?" Jaeger slid his silver shades down the tip of his nose and peered over the edge at Jack. "And if I did?" Jack shrugged. "For argument's sake," Jaeger continued. "Let us say there is a body in the trunk of my automobile which I have asked you to dispose of to satisfy a substantial debt that you owe to me. What would your response be to a request of this nature?" Jack took a moment to glance at the silent bodyguard standing vigil near the hood, then back to the small man in front of him. There was no good answer, or only one answer that would be good enough. "For argument's sake," Jack said. "I owe you big time." "It is quite substantial." Jack nodded. So long as whatever might be in the trunk is already dead and it makes us square, I can't say no. Jaeger lifted an eyebrow in his bodyguard's direction. The man shifted his head in a passing reference to a nod. It is. It does. You don't. He opened the driver's door and ushered Jack behind the wheel. Jaeger twirled a set of keys around his extended finger. Return it by 3 o'clock, said Jaeger. Washed and waxed. Got it, Jack said as he reached for the keys. Jaeger slammed his hand on Jack's arm, clinched it to the door. Hand wash only. Jack swallowed hard. Wouldn't consider any other way, he answered. Jaeger shut the door and waved him off. Jack slid the key into the ignition. The engine rumbled to life. He fought down a semi, dropped it in gear and wheeled the 19-foot behemoth away from the club. 12. He drove past the park where Goldie and Kansas held him hostage and further up the winding road into Red Rock Canyon. A lot of tourists stuck to the main byways, but a simple turn onto a dirt path and a few bounces across potholes could carry a car beyond the hills and into wilderness that looked the same when Mormon pioneers passed by the oasis at Vegas and decided not to take a gamble on it. Jack searched the sandy scrub brush for a turnout, someplace out of the ways to do the job he needed to get done. He wasn't alone. He passed 2 guys in cheap suits by a black SUV. The rear gate was lifted, they looked sweaty and stopped what they were doing to watch him pass. Jack gave them a wave, but they didn't wave back. He cruised past a second car, this one with a single guy manning a shovel. It's like a fucking elephant's graveyard out here, he muttered and didn't bother to wave. Hundreds of people went missing in Vegas each year. He bet most of them were out here. Even though he didn't particularly believe in ghosts, he shivered. If they were real, there would be plenty out here to witness him adding another to their number. He spied a small turnout on the side of the road and eased the Cadillac over. This spot looked as good as any. Jack shut off the car and hoped there was a shovel in the trunk. He wasn't sure how the last guy he passed would react if he asked to borrow one, but he was sure it wouldn't be good. He stepped into the desert sun and inched his shades up his nose. He stretched, keyed open the trunk and stumbled back. Kansas was curled in a fetal position, duct tape across her mouth, around her wrists and ankles. She stared up at him with saucer-sized eyes and screamed through the gag. Jack yelped and slammed the lid down. What was she doing in the trunk? How did this happen? What the hell, he yelled at the trunk. Jack turned the key and opened the trunk again. Yes, it was Kansas curled up in there. She was tied up, gagged and mascara smeared her tear-stained cheeks. He eased her out and propped her against the car on unsteady legs as he peeled the tape off her mouth. I bet this is good, he said. You would win that bet for sure. She gnawed on the tape holding her wrists while Jack freed her ankles. Give me the short version, he said. I fucked with the wrong midget, she scrubbed her cheeks with dusty palms. I'm gonna need a longer version, he told her. Did you try to get him to invest too? Sort of. Did he kill your pet gangsta? She giggled. No. But Goldie owes him big time. That's what my money was for. It was supposed to be, but Goldie took off with it. All of it. Some friend. He can't help it, she sniffed. He's an addict. He's got a gambling problem. So he went to piss away my money. Or double it. That's always his plan, to double our money. My money. What did you do while he did what he did? I went to explain and try to trade, she ran her hand across her crotch to indicate the region. For more time. Then how did you end up in the trunk? That little fucker had a string of lot lizards come in and let one suck him off while I watched. That must be his mo. You saw it? 4 girls, said Jack. 3 girls and a man in a red dress. That's Arizona Annie the truck stop tranny. Is that a thing? Like you wouldn't believe. She stared at Jack for a moment. How much do you owe him? She asked. A lot. She leaned against him and he let her rest her head on his shoulder. He wanted you to kill me. You were supposed to be dead. Then why are we out here? That's the confusing part. Kansas slid her hand into his pocket and felt around. I'm sure it's not for that, he said, glancing around. But we might get away with it. Keys, she dug in his other pocket. He let her look for a few moments as they stared into each other's eyes. Sure, she robbed him and sure he was supposed to hide her dead body in the desert, but pheromones don't care about that. In the trunk, he indicated with a nod. But Kansas kept looking a few moments more. 13. What are we going to do? I've got to take the car back. Do you know how much we could sell that for? She blinked sand away from her green eyes. This guy tried to kill you once. Technically, he wanted you to kill me. Or something. I told him I wasn't killing anyone. Maybe it was a test? She glanced around at their surroundings to make sure they were alone. So far so good. For what? Does he want you to work for him? Is that how he gets you? Blackmail you into doing what he wants. I didn't do anything. Except owe him money now that you know, you're not dead and buried. That's why we should run. Take the car and get out of here. We don't have money to run, he answered, but he was thinking about it. Vegas was losing its allure and a chance to go on the road with Kansas was just the kind of change he needed. They could grab a tent and camp out under the stars, making long sweet love in the moonlight until they rustled up some stake money and he could find a game. Maybe she could work a hustle with him, something to get some cash from tourists, just a little bit, just enough. The drunk bit worked quite well, and so long as she didn't let it go too far he thought she could pull off the part of Paramore. He's going to kill me again, she said. And you too for not paying him back or doing his dirty deed. She was right. Jaeger was not the type to let bygones be unless they got gone. Let's go, he agreed. She squealed and threw her arms around his shoulders and wrapped him in a kiss. Her lips were full of promises and the way she ground against him let him know the wait to collect would be worth it. They jumped in the car and he reached for the keys. Left them in the trunk, he grinned and practically skipped around to the back to grab them from the trunk lock. He glanced up as a cloud of dust rolled over the hill. Goldie's giant crew cab truck crested the rise and slid to a gravelly stop across the road from them. Shit, said Jack. Shit, Kansas agreed. The passenger door opened and Jaeger climbed down and walked around to the driver's side. The bodyguard leaned out of the window and did his best imitation of a 1,000-yard stare while the back door opened. And he shoved Goldie out of the door. He fell to the ground in a heap and picked himself up, brushing dirt off his high tops and biting back a glare. Circumstance calls for strange bedfellows, Mr. House. Jack put his hands up. The Romanian gangster pimp didn't scare him so much as the hulking bodyguard with a pistol pointed at him. Goldie screwed up his eyebrows and curled up one lip. What are you doing with him? Goldie growled. Kansas slid over to the door and stared. Where did you go? She pouted. I had things to do, said Goldie. Places to be. I went to him to help you. I know, baby, and I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. He was going to kill me. That's what he told me, baby. That's why I came back. To rescue you. Jack thought he might throw up. Or run. But one look at the bodyguard and the pickup truck kept him rooted in place. The man had produced a gun that was casually resting on the edge of the open window. Just the tip of the barrel peeking out in their general direction. Jack was pretty sure the guy could shoot, and even if he couldn't, why bother taking the chance? I didn't need rescuing, Kansas snarled. I had that part taken care of. Way to go, Kansas, he wanted to shout. Instead he tried to hide a grin. Here I am anyway, Goldie curled his lip. Touching, interrupted Jaeger. But there is the matter of business to discuss and I am growing tired of the sun. Mr. Jaeger, it seems you have not satisfied your debt to me yet. She wasn't dead. Alas, said Jaeger. We can take care of that. The bodyguard lifted his pistol. Goldie and Jack shouted no at the same time and moved for Kansas, but Annie grabbed Goldie and jerked him back. The pistol moved on Jack and he froze, hands shot up in the air. He wasn't going to smart off this time. He took my money, Jack nudged his head at Goldie. Is this a true statement? Jaeger turned to the gangsta. Annie twisted his arm up behind his shoulder blades and yanked a little harder than necessary. Goldie moaned. Yes. Would you be so kind as to hand it over? Goldie used his free hand to pull out the wad of cash and handed it to Jaeger. It's not doubled, Kansas called out. I came to save you. I called him to save you, said Jaeger. Your story of a recently acquired largesse touched me, which is why you were in the trunk without a bullet accessorizing your attire. What now? Jack asked. You have satisfied your debt to me, Jaeger threw the wad of cash through the open window of the truck. You still owe me, he said to Goldie. Annie shoved him out into the road. Get the keys to my car, Jaeger ordered. Goldie grunted as he massaged his shoulder, but he shuffled across the road. Jack held up the keys. Toss them. Goldie stopped in the middle of the road. But, Jack slipped the keys out of his pocket and arced them up over Goldie's head in one smooth toss. Goldie watched the keys twist and turn above him. A black SUV roared over the small rise and smashed into him with a wet crunch. It plowed over Goldie with a loud crackle and pop and kept going. A dust-covered deputy's car ramped the small hill in desert-hot pursuit. It fishtailed as the deputy thought about stopping. He just slowed down and screamed out of the window. "Don't move." His rear wheels threw up a cloud of dust as he spun out, tailing the SUV. Jaeger and the bodyguard watched the deputy race away. He made a micro nod to the bodyguard and Annie jumped into the back of the crew cab and slammed the door. The bodyguard did a K-turn, avoiding the bloody mess in the road, and rumbled back toward the strip. Jaeger crossed over the road and slid in behind the steering wheel as Kansas moved over to make room. "Told you it would work," she said and threw her arm over his shoulder. Jaeger cranked up the caddy and threw up a rooster tail of gravel and grit as he fell in on the bumper of the truck. The last Jack saw of Kansas was her head dropping down into Jaeger's lap as he drove away. They left what was left of poor Goldie in the middle of the dusty road. Jack stopped a couple yards away and watched them leave. The dust settled down from the car chase and the pimp convoy after a few moments. The sun began baking the ground, and a slight breeze stirred the squishy clothes in the middle of the trail. Jack wondered if he should bury the gangsta and shrugged it off. He didn't have a shovel and it was a long walk back to the city. When he got back, he was going to grab his RV and make for points west. Maybe stop to see what the action was like in Reno. He'd need a little stake money though to pay for gas. And he'd have to finally stop by Ms. Katsopoulos' trailer to make arrangements to get his RV back. He gagged a little at the thought and bit it back. "Suck it up, Buttercup," he grumbled advice to himself. 14. Jack picked a quarter up off the orange carpet. The casino had redecorated since the last time he walked in, but why they chose orange and red squares escaped him. Probably something to do with psychology and making people spend more money. Same reason they pumped oxygen into the air vents. He slid the quarter in the slot and pecked the button. The digital screen whirred, settling on 2 cherries and a wild card. Alarms sounded as coins jangled into the tray below. 1 quarter. What luck! Now he could pay rent on his RV lot. Or he could settle a couple of debts early and get in some karma points. But he knew about this standing game in the back of a strip joint only 3 blocks away. The slot payout would be enough to buy in. Hell, with the way Lady Luck was working right now, she'd be pretty pissed if he didn't try the game. After all, she just rewarded him with a payout from the slots on just 1 quarter. It would be disrespectful to ignore that sign from the gambling gods. He stepped away from the cash booth and pocketed his winnings. There was the smart thing to do and the right thing to do. He knew which one would win. He stopped at a machine to feed in 2 $20 bills and trade them for singles. If the game was at a strip club, he might as well contribute to some college funds while he was there. The end.